So Anita Jackson is MomsRising's Director of Digital Communications, Director and Editor-in-Chief of the blog. Her intersectional communications strategies are part of MomsRising's daily campaign and fundraising work. Anita leads creative communication campaigns that center marginalized voices, support policy-changing grassroots actions, cultivate and support grassroots donors, and drive organizational growth. By organizing in methods both innovative and tried and true, MomsRising's content reaches an audience of several million, including an active, diverse, and influential network on the ground and across traditional and social media platforms. Anita earned her AP from UC Berkeley and her JD from American University's Washington College of Law, where she worked on complex international human rights litigation and focused studies on women's rights and human rights. So thank you so much, Anita, for joining us, and I will turn the mic over to you. Just one quick note, we will be taking questions, but we'll be asking those mostly at the end of Anita, so she can go ahead and go through her presentation. Thank you.
Great. So I will go ahead. I'll be going through a set of slides and sharing some of the strategies that MomsRising has found to be really effective in engaging people at their busiest and people who also need to advocate for themselves in a group to get real change. So my pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining today from the East Bay, from San Ramon on Chochenyo and Ohlone lands. And I am so happy to be with you all. It is January 23rd, 2021. I am wearing my Mina Harris Phenomenal Women Samosas Mimosas shirt, which just makes me really happy. And here we are. And I think it's so important to take a breath and acknowledge that. And so before we jump into the strategizing, I just wanted us to take that moment to orient ourselves in time and space and get a sense of this era that we're not only living in together, but really creating together. This is a picture of my kids 10 years ago. I'm happy to report they've still got that resilience and joy, and now a few marches under their belts. 4 years ago, almost to the day, I brought those kids with me to the Pleasanton BART station. It was 8:30 a.m. I think it was a Saturday. I was really unsure what would happen. I only knew that we had to show up. The platform was relatively quiet, but I was happy to see a few people with those pink hats and holding signs. We were apparently going to the same place. It was early, but at every stop, more and more people got onto that train, and almost all of them had pink hats and signs. And very quickly, it was standing room only. I had a small bag full of these MomsRising temporary tattoos and a wet sponge with which to apply them. So my kids and I offered these to all those friendly people on the train, and almost everyone said yes. You can see, and probably many of you remember, the crowds that formed by the time we got to Oakland. And you can see those in the picture on the left, and the MomsRising tattooed hands on the right. In the middle is a picture of the marchers in DC that day as well. I share that story and these pictures to remind us of where we were 4 years ago. I want you to take a minute just to remember for yourself where you were, what you were doing, how you were feeling. What motivated you to get up and out the door then? And then let's take a minute to remember last Wednesday, when Kamala Harris became the first woman, the first Black and South Asian woman to be the Vice President of the United States of America. 4 years after that first Women's March, and now we're here. I'm going to ask you to think about that and remember that feeling. And before we dive into the strategizing, I want you to take a minute to just hug yourself for real, give yourself a little bit of love. Take a deep breath and offer yourself some appreciation, because the road to get here was not assured, and it was very long. So what we're going to be talking about today is what we need to stay engaged in the coming weeks and months and years. We're going to talk about some very practical ways to organize your communities digitally, which is more important than ever since we're still making it through this pandemic. We absolutely need to stay engaged, even though we're in a new era, because, as I'll mention again, our work is not done. As you all know well, things did not magically get fixed with this new administration. We all have deep work to do for racial justice, for gender justice, and for economic justice. But here together, we are on a Saturday. This is the 4th day that the United States has ever had a woman vice president. I got to keep coming back to that. So we have hope that by staying engaged, by staying empathetic and connected with each other, by using the best of our creativity, our strategy, our community, we can make real progress, and that is something to celebrate. So today I'm going to share some overarching principles and practical digital organizing strategies. It's going to be pretty specific to that. Sharing that because I want you to understand what has powered the work of Moms Rising since 2006 and continues to work, and that you can take some of these same tools to build community and to build a shared resilient movement for our dignity and for our rights. That's how you stay engaged. And that's one powerful way you can engage with others to care and to learn and to take action by your side. So here I'm starting by sharing with you some of Moms Rising's policy priorities. And I'm sharing these because these are kind of the bread and butter issues that many of us face every day, but often have not been thought of as a sort of high-profile, headline-grabbing issues that build political power and movements. And yet, at the same time, these are the issues that speak to our everyday realities. I know that for many of us gathered here today, these are the issues that we think about and struggle with daily. Childcare, paid medical leave, healthcare, immigration rights, and more. And actually, in this COVID era, those everyday realities have come to the forefront in the media and in Congress. And I really want to emphasize that that is not by accident. It's not by accident that those are becoming headline news. And it's not because people in power suddenly recognized on their own that these struggles that the data show are falling primarily on women's shoulders must be addressed. It's not by accident, it's by design. It's because of grassroots organizing. It's because we're effectively organizing to tell our own stories. When we talk about effective strategies to stay engaged in 2021 and beyond, so let's start with the strategy of speaking for ourselves. Telling our own stories is a tried and true tactic that continues to be incredibly powerful force for change. These are pictures from a couple of events in the pre-COVID era where Moms Rising volunteers went to their local congressional and district offices or went to Capitol Hill in DC to share their stories and to share petition signatures of people who could not be there but still wanted to lift their voices. Using a layered approach to telling our stories greatly amplifies our efforts for education, organizing, and impact. When we tell people that what happened in their lives matters and can make a difference, we give them a chance to show up as their authentic selves to this movement that we're working to build, and that is continuing to be built in 2021 and beyond. Sharing our personal stories is how you build a movement that endures. So is this movement building work really changing our political landscape for elections and for the lives we live between elections? Yes, it is. Is this the everyday work of talking to our legislators about policymaking? Definitely. But it's doing that work in a way that's organized, impactful, and easier for more of us to participate together. So I'm going to say here that Moms Rising was purposefully designed as a collaborative, rapid response grassroots organizational model. This is a broad grassroots movement for not only parents, but anyone who's a caregiver to have an impact on public policy. And to build this kind of a movement, for you to build your own communities, for everybody who's at this talk today, we follow the first rule of organizing, and that is go where people are. To educate, to engage, to empower, and to activate. And right now, more than ever, we know it in this era, people are online. I mean, we're here together by video today. 4 years ago, I know many of us were together in person, but just because we're not in person now doesn't mean that we have to wait to find each other and to nurture and build robust communities. In fact, we can't wait. But getting people involved and engaged, especially when you're talking about digital organizing, is not always easy. There are what we've identified 2 main barriers to engagement. And the first is pretty clear. Parents and caregivers of all stripes are hard to reach because we are busy. And in COVID times, we are busier than ever. We're juggling jobs, we're juggling caregiving duties, leaving little time for activism. And for those of us who made it on a Saturday, standing ovation and fist bumps to everybody. And the second hurdle is that people are pretty much buried by their email inboxes and by ads on every app. So it's harder than ever to push our own movement messaging through all that noise. So in order to resonate with the public, to stay nimble, we have to stay nimble and responsive. This means ride the waves of change and news as they go through the media instead of waving at them as they pass you by. Constantly, quantitatively test effective and creative strategic engagement opportunities and messaging with your members. And I'll talk a little bit more about testing. Use data to stay on target toward your long-term goals. Basically, goals and outcomes need to be tracked so that resources can be moved into what's working and away from what's not working. And if you're with a small organization or if you are working on your own and you have limited resources, testing is going to be the number one way that you can make sure that you're making the most impact with what you have. When you test, don't be afraid to try new things and prioritize experimentation. Go into it knowing 3 things. 1, some experiments will fail. And if you're doing it right, you will face a lot of experiments that fail. MomsRising certainly has. The second thing is most experiments will move some issues forward incrementally. So you have to find a way to celebrate the tiniest wins. I mean the tiniest wins, because that's what helps you build momentum for the bigger wins. And every once in a while, some of your experiments will just soar. You can constantly be learning and listening using metrics and by maintaining the dialogue. So be in dialogue with your community. Don't just broadcast. There is a huge temptation, and we saw this, really accelerate on social media during the Trump era, that when we saw, pieces of social media posts, memes, provocative articles, we saw people immediately sharing those on social media, but not necessarily having a dialogue with their communities. But it's listening that builds a movement. So if you've got a website or a blog, you can regularly pick out the pieces of content from your own community. I'm not talking just about, MSNBC or CNN, but the stories from your own community, and lift up the voices of local leaders. Local and community leaders, and policy experts on topics that you care about can be the most important voices when it comes to grassroots movement building. Being in dialogue helps build your community, build the movement, and importantly, it does build political power and political will. It's a practice. It really is a practice to bring some mindfulness to what we share online. Again, because there is a temptation, and social media definitely rewards us for, I don't want to say mindlessly sharing, but for sharing without necessarily starting a dialogue. Have as many avenues for engagement as possible at the same time. This is something where it takes, if you've got a team of people, maybe just 2 people, you can have each person starting a dialogue about an issue that matters to you on different platforms and see what works. Do you have more people who are engaging in a private Facebook group maybe than on Twitter? Or have you set up an email listserv where people are more willing to be open? That's the experimentation that you'll want to do, just to see where's your community willing to engage and have that dialogue. So not only is that important when it comes to working together, it's also a highly effective way to organize your communication and then be heard by leaders and the media. So in the past several years, MomsRising has had a constant stream of member voices engaging through many different avenues, urging leaders to pay attention to those key policy priorities that I shared earlier. And this is what we call the layer cake organizing. We're going to talk more about this in a short bit, but I'm going to give you some quick examples of different ways of engaging that MomsRising regularly opens for members on one issue at the same time. And this will give you a concrete idea about how this works and how these layers can add up to real political power. So the first tactic is collaboration with aligned organizations and policy partners. So you identify the issue experts who can advise you on strategy, timing, targeting, and effective sharing of your story. You might have effective messaging. They might be able to share with you effective messaging about, here I have an example about messaging we were doing around children's healthcare and children's healthcare coverage. So it did involve sharing personal stories, but it also involved hearing from policy experts about what the legislative priorities were so that we could be sure that we were sharing the right personal story at the right time. MomsRising works closely with over 150 other organizations, and that's because having many voices makes our policy expertise and understanding richer, and we're able to better educate grassroots and engage more people that way. We can also share those issue experts' content on our website. So we share that on our blog all the time. You might go to the blog and see pieces of content that you might not necessarily receive via email. So it's unique content and it's educational. And it also lifts up other people's voices. This is another way of being in dialogue and not just kind of, bullhorning our own voice out all the time. I think Women's March has done a really great job at this too, lifting up information from several different organizations and individuals and becoming a hub of information. And many of you, whether you know it or not, you probably serve as the information hub for your own friends and family because you care about the issues facing your community and our country. People come to you. Maybe they directly ask you for your thoughts, or maybe they browse through your Facebook posts. Just know that what you share has influence and value. So make sure that you're sharing from the best resources that you can. And that means information from news organizations that do fact checks, but it also means that if you want to make even more of an impact, you can look for information from established grassroots organizations like Women's March, National Women's Law Center, MomsRising, and others. And here's why. Our organizations aren't just sharing information, they're doing it strategically. Maybe they're timed to complement what's happening in the legislative calendar, or maybe these are actually messages that have been tested by experts to resonate the most with people who are the most effective. And that's what you want to amplify. For those of you who are already digital organizers, you'll recognize one-click member advocacy. This is human engagement supported by technology. And I'm sorry that says citizen engagement. I should have changed that. It's human engagement. This is what most people think of when they think of an organization with an online presence. Examples of this can include one-click actions that send an email directly to an elected leader or decision maker that can lead you to sign a petition, or it can be an invitation to phone bank or text bank. I know many of us saw those links the last several months. So these days, more people have access to organizing tools like these. In the lead up to the 2020 election, which feels both recent and a long time ago, we saw unprecedented numbers of people step up to volunteer to get out the vote. Many people organized their own events on platforms like Mobilize and on shared websites like protecttheresults.com, which is now not functioning because we have the results of the election. But it was a wonderful shared platform for people across the country to do their own grassroots local organizing. The cumulative effects of what we think of as one petition signature or one text message are huge. Again, if you look at the 2020 election, and I'm going to say this a couple times because it's such good news, we saw the highest voter turnout in 120 years. So I'm going to go back to this idea of sharing our stories. The human presence member voice proxy is what we think of when we share our stories. When COVID isn't keeping us inside, on-the-ground leaders at MomsRising would collect these stories and deliver these member messages along with petitions and letters that were collected online, along with an object like a proxy item to represent busy people who couldn't be there, right to elected leaders, either to their in-district offices, like we have here in the Bay Area in California, or directly to Capitol Hill. So proxy items could include member messages that we printed out on stickers and attached to apples to represent healthcare or paid sick days, that we decoupaged on boxes, member messages that we wrote on paper butterflies to represent migrating families, or decorated baby shirts that we hung on clotheslines in front of state houses and in front of Congress. You name it, MomsRising has probably put a member message on it and delivered it. The power of delivering stories this way is that this proxy object creates a media moment, a photo op basically, and then it really amplifies member voices. And kind of importantly as well, elected officials and decision makers often keep that proxy item around after we deliver it. If it's really cute or really eye-catching, they will keep that in their office and continue to repeat our stories to other people who visit. A couple of years ago, some of our volunteers delivered mini trains, like toy trains, to elected officials in North Carolina around Medicaid expansion. And the message was, they were little engines that could. Our volunteers returned regularly to advocate for families on this and found that most of the elected officials actually liked the little trains and they kept them along with our messaging. So, and as you can imagine, this kind of engagement often gets media attention as well, especially when our volunteers deliver the items and also hold a press conference. You give a call to your local journalists and you let them know you're making the delivery, and they will often come to cover it as a story. So before last year, MomsRising volunteers were regularly taking action on the ground in person, as I was saying, local in-district gatherings, sharing their personal stories with the media and with these leaders, delivering other constituent stories to leaders and more. This is, of course, a tried and true way of staying engaged, and we're going to continue doing this in 2021. And with so many new members of Congress, don't forget, we brought in a whole wave of new leaders. Maybe you have new city council members where you live, or new school board members. Now is the time, January, before it gets too far into February, now is the time to make your calls and introduce yourself and share what's most important to you. And of course, if on-the-ground organizing isn't happening, Or if in the event there is an event and you can't make it, you can continue to stay engaged by calling up your elected leader and telling them, be on the lookout for your friends who will be showing up, or for a wave of emails that's coming in about the topic that you care about. This is another tactic that Moms Rising has used with a lot of success over the years, as Congress has gotten more and more emails, and people are like, is this really effective, to send an email or to sign a petition? I'll tell you, when you print those out and then you give the staffers a heads up that you're coming to the office with a printout, and then when you have your community members all give the office that heads up, suddenly you are creating even more, more of a signal to them that this is important. Telling them to be on the lookout for something that you're going to deliver is really a powerful way to make sure that they do count your signature or your story. And of course, there's always the good old newspapers and other press to educate and broaden your audience and amplify pressure on leadership. So many grassroots organizing campaigns include proactive outreach to the media. You do not have to have a public relations staff to do this. I really want to emphasize that. Twitter actually really is an effective way to contact reporters, as is email and good old phone. If you've organized a group of your community members to take action in some way and you want elected officials to take notice, you can write a letter to the editor, but you can also tell your community that you're writing a letter to the editor. You can share the text of your letter to a few friends. Again, when you do that listening, you're in dialogue and you know, oh, my friends pay attention more to this listserv or to this private Facebook group or wherever they are. And you can share that text of the letter and invite them to send a letter to the editor too. That is the kind of grassroots organizing that will help us win. It sounds a lot like the grassroots organizing that we have been doing, and that's because it is. It's basically what every grassroots organizing group works to do: inspire individuals to take action, inspire communities to act together, because we're stronger together, and together we win. So I want to highlight that local media is a powerful tool. And again, I know I said this before, I have to say it again though. Sometimes it's more powerful than the national outlet. Local leaders as well as community members will read and sometimes prioritize local news. I know that many people in my own community read, the local patch before, or, the local newspaper before they look at a national outlet. But traditional media coverage is not the end of the story. We're going to talk a little bit about social media. Moms Rising is among many organizations that's found a huge amount of success in social media organizing. This is where testing and measuring really comes in, so that you know what kind of impact you've had. But it's also where you can educate, amplify, and organize really fast, as we have all seen over the past several years. Social media platforms, it has to be said, are really having a reckoning right now. And so it's important to keep in mind that social media is just one tool in this toolbox that I'm sharing with you. But, I would be remiss not to mention it. We have volunteers who are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook and regularly share action links and share their stories in those spaces because that's where they're used to being. And that's meaningful for them. And we've seen coalitions. And for me, this has been maybe one of the most heartening parts of this, is to see the coalitions of grassroots organizations create, social media toolkits complete with images, sample social posts, and even a timing schedule to help amplify each other's actions and messages. But as my colleague Celie Recio, Moms Rising social media director, would remind us, there is more to social media organizing than simply starting a Facebook group and sharing posts. Social media organizing really could be its own topic for a webinar. At the heart of it, it's still about relational organizing and relationship building. you still need to get to know people and their needs and desires, and you need to know what motivates them to participate and take action, maybe in a way that they hadn't before. In this new era, 4 years after our first Women's March, some things are still true. And that's that being authentic and sharing your personal story is still the most powerful way to educate others and inspire them to take action with you and to make change. And as we move into the Biden-Harris era, this is something that won't be changing. Stories make a difference. So here's an example of how this layered or layer cake approach to organizing worked for our Moms Vote 2020 campaign. You can see we had over 23 million texts and phone calls through our phone banks. It says here to low-frequency voting moms, but I would say they were low-frequency, high potential because they've really turned out. Almost 4.5 million handwritten postcards sent targeting moms. These were the ones from MomsRising. We had also pre-addressed and pre-stamped them to really make it easy for people to not have to to not have to pay basically for postage and not have to handwrite the addresses on there. They could really focus on the message. We had over 72,000 volunteers stepping forward to help get out the vote. And we had a social media reach of over 88 million in English and Spanish between our paid and organic ads. So this is coming back to that Stronger Together theme, together with thousands of other individuals and organizations. And I know so many of you here today contributed to that work of writing postcards and making calls and text messages and talking with your friends and neighbors. Again, I have to say that we achieved the highest voter turnout in 120 years. And that is certainly something to celebrate. So reviewing the key lessons learned about staying engaged and organizing our communities using the tools that we have. Number one, provide multiple ways to engage on multiple platforms. If you are not now like a professional organizer, if you're not organizing others, but you're looking for actions to take yourself, look for organizations that meet you where you're at, that honor your time and your story. Collaborate generously. Find out what's already happening in your town. This can be done with a quick Google search or a review of your social media to help you find the latest. Here in the East Bay, I found a Tri-Valley grassroots organizing group that came together with Indivisible, members of the local Women's March, and a number of other groups that came together to organize themselves in the last couple of years. And we've been sharing what we've learned across our platforms. So if you learn of an event, via Facebook, see if you can think of 2 or 3 friends with whom you could send that via email. Friends who might be interested but aren't necessarily on Facebook. That cross-platform sharing is really an important way to, not be in the echo chamber. Be creative and experiment. So remember those MomsRising baby shirts at Capitol Hill. Craft projects and making art is a great way not only to express yourself, but to communicate a powerful message, engage your friends, and to make sure that you're remembered by your elected officials. Honor the busy lives and the wisdom born of personal experiences. I know at the top that I mentioned checking out what policy organizations and policy experts have to say. That's incredibly important. And at the same time, those policy points have to be paired with personal stories for people to remember them. That's kind of a tried and true fact about educating people and about getting them to care. You have to pair the facts with personal stories so that people believe the facts, and it gives them a way of seeing how that plays out in people's real lives. And if you're organizing others and people are sharing their stories with you, let them know that you see their effort and honor their bravery. Honor also your own bravery and your own wisdom that guides you. I think it was Kimberly in the main session a few minutes ago was mentioning how important it is to rest. And, I know this is a session on, staying engaged. And I really want to encourage people to know that it's okay to step back as well, because this is a movement and we've got each other. We've got each other's backs, so if you need to take, a day or a week or a month and step back, it's important. It's important not only that you do that for yourself, but also because it sets a good example for others, and it shows the power of our movement. If we're strong enough that we can step back and rest, this is a durable movement. So celebrate yourself in your community. As I mentioned earlier, using metrics will keep your organization on track with your goals. It can be very easy to drown in the chaos, as we've sadly seen so much of in the last 4 or 5 years. So identify your goals early on and decide, what does success look like? Is it 5 letters to the editor in support of childcare funding? 10 people signing my petition for immediate COVID relief checks? It sounds simple, but this is how you can make a measurable impact. And then be ready to act fast and learn from experience. When you have your community organized and in good communication with each other using some of these tools that we've talked about, you can respond quickly to what's happening in the news or in your community in a way that honors your values and messages, shares the messages that you most want to communicate. And when you know what's working by using metrics, you can quickly cut out what's not working and focus your resources on what is. And be sure to keep it fun. Like I said, those crafts over the years have been some of the greatest grassroots engagement that MomsRising has offered. And this is how we do it. This is how we stay engaged in 2021 and beyond. We know our work is not done. We have much to speak out on. Things that have been broken for a long time are not going to magically fix themselves. We have to stand up for each other and for ourselves. We have to speak out for the racial justice, the gender justice, and the economic justice that we all know that our nation so deeply needs. But we know what it looks like and what it feels like to connect with each other. Remember that feeling when we all saw each other at that first Women's March? I remember feeling like, for the first time in a long time, that I wasn't alone. By knowing our stories and by sharing our authentic stories and by using the tools we have to connect with each other, we can continue to stay engaged in all the ways that we're going to need to keep this momentum going. So I'm going to end by quoting the very end of The Hill We Climb, which we heard a little bit of in the main stage talk earlier. And it was written by our great National Youth Poet Laureate, Amanda Gorman, at the inauguration. And I feel that this poem will be quoted and will guide us for years to come. And she says at the end, "When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid, for the new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita, for that wonderful presentation. We have a couple of questions from attendees. So why don't we tackle those now? And folks, if you have additional questions, we have some time, so please feel free to continue to post those in the comments, and we'll see if we can get to all of them. So the first question is, why not focus on single-payer healthcare and universal childcare? Can we ask for specific policies?
That's a great question. And I think that, when we're talking about, so this session in particular, we're talking about organizing our communities. And so, on one level, I encourage you to reach out to your member of Congress and absolutely tell them how you feel about, universal childcare, about single-payer healthcare, and why you feel like those issues are a priority. But it's even more powerful if you can share your story about that, maybe on a blog or on social media, and ask your community, what do you all think about single payer healthcare? Why does this matter to you? And then if you can collect 5 stories and take those to your elected leader and say, this is a priority in my community, and here are the names of your constituents, including me, to whom this matters, and this is why this matters, then you're a lot more likely to get, maybe a meeting with the legislative assistant for that particular topic, rather than having a staffer kind of take down your name and address and say, thank you, check, I got that you care about this issue. It just gives you a little bit more of, organizing strength.
Yeah, and I love the focus that you have on sort of people bringing that power together. I feel like there's so much communication out there around, just call your representative or, write this one letter. And I think sort of this idea of how important it is to, think more collectively about things. So, another sort of follow-up question. So, it seems, there's really this need for more coalition building and collaboration right now. So how can we really work to make that happen?
I love this question. I want to share with you that in all my years of doing this work, I don't think I've ever seen better collaboration and coalition building than I did in the run-up to the 2020 election. In progressive organizing, you have organizations at the local, state, and national level, and they don't always talk with each other, and sometimes you have messaging that's kind of passing each other or not amplifying each other. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. But I think people got really focused in the run-up to the 2020 election, and we saw some kind of organic coalition building work happening where people just reached out to each other. And I would join these weekly coalition calls with over 200 organizers from across the country at every level, not just national organizations, but state and local. And I think it arose because of the need. So, the beautiful thing was we could hear from organizers in Arizona talking to organizers in Michigan, talking to organizers in Pennsylvania and Georgia, and they were each sharing what was working locally for them. And as you know, in electoral politics, it's all state organized. So it was very important for messages to be specific to that state, but also to be in concert and in harmony with each other on a national level about get out the vote. So it really, and it really arose out of people just emailing each other, picking up the phone and reaching out and saying, we've got to do this, we've got to get organized, and, creating these listservs and these organizations. And I believe that that can continue to happen. We showed that we can do it, so we can continue to do it. And I encourage you to just, again, really think about, if you are looking to build a coalition locally, make a list of maybe 15 to 20 people in your local area. Again, a quick Google search can tell you who your local Moms Demand Action people are, who your local Women's March people are, and reach out to them and ask them who they know. I think you'll be really pleasantly surprised to find that you can build a coalition that way.
I think you just touched on something that's really we can nerd out about tools for a second. I know and this isn't really the topic of the talk, but just because you were touching on it. I'm curious to know sort of what tool you used in this coalition for all these calls, or a couple other tools that you found really useful. And specifically, we had a question on, can anyone use Mobilize, and just platforms that you would recommend? So maybe a list of like your sort of top 3 to 5 tools, preferably ones that don't cost thousands and thousands of dollars a year for a subscription, which I know some of these civic engagement tools, they do.
Right. That is true, that a number of them are costly. And so some organizations actually got together to sort of pool their resources and have access to the voter file, or have access to other tools like Mobilize and text message tools. I would say that if you're looking for access to a tool, like maybe you want to do text banking or phone banking, you could reach out to a large organization like MomsRising, or like Move On, or like Indivisible, and see if they have, tools that they would be willing to share. Because that did happen within the coalition, that, MomsRising has a text message platform set up, and so, we would say, text vote to 747464 to find out your local voting information. And there were a number of groups who maybe didn't have that same capacity, but they were able to share that number. Or we might have a call-in number for Congress, and we would invite all sorts of people to share that same call-in number. So you don't necessarily have to have the tool to be able to, amplify or participate in an action, or to even create your own. You can share.
Yeah, I love that, because I think so often that's not necessarily the first thing folks think of, but this idea that, I think more and more now people are seeing the connections that you're talking about between sort of the local all the way up to the federal level. At least we hope that that's what people are seeing. And, that also entails, like, if we really want things at all levels to be successful, like the bigger organizations really giving that hand up to the smaller organizations and helping them to amplify and to come together. So that's great. A couple other questions. So, we're not in a presidential election year. It feels like we've been in one for the past 4 years, but we're not in one this year. But of course, we're still looking to keep up the momentum, right? So when things feel a little bit less urgent, they not necessarily less urgent, but they may feel less urgent. What are some, maybe your top 3 tips for sort of staying engaged, motivating other people to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's incredibly important that we address this, because I think that there is still this notion among traditional media that the chaos of Trump is the thing that gets ratings, that people tune in when things are terrible, and they don't bother to pay attention when, everything is nice, normal, and boring. And I think one of the big lessons that I'm taking from these past several years of organizing is that to be in authentic relationship with our communities, that by doing that, we know what our stories are and what we need to lift up. So just because there's not an immediate, piece of chaos, something chaotic happening that we have to react to, now, like, maybe we can step into our power a little bit and say, hey, instead of reacting, let's control the narrative a little bit. Let's put forward our vision of what we want. This is the time to do that, especially because this is when new members of Congress are coming in. Their priorities, their agendas are not necessarily set yet. So it's a really great time for us to say, first 100 days, these are our priorities. We want to see you pass this in, the first 100 days, first 10 days, this is a really great time to educate lawmakers. So again, I can't emphasize enough. Part of this new era is about not waiting to react to a disaster, but really, like nurturing our own vision and thinking about what do we want to see and being able to articulate that.
Yeah, this idea of, really being proactive, having this opportunity to be proactive, a little bit more space and room to do that, a little more time to do that, and articulating that vision for our communities, as you said, rather than sort of being almost thrust into this reactive sort of stance, which has been unfortunately a lot of what I think folks have experienced the past 4 years. So, yeah.
So it's a practice, right? It's a practice. This is why I meditate daily. Really, it's because, part of my work personally of being in relation with my community is to get together weekly and really spend some time visioning. What do we think is possible? What's possible for housing in the Bay Area? What's possible for transportation and jobs? What's possible for true racial justice? What would that look like? Now is the moment to really, think about that. Think about the details of that.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really, really important point. Let me just take a quick time check. We have a few more minutes. So I think we have one more question. So this was touched on sort of a little bit earlier, sort of prioritizing, but, maybe formulated a slightly different way. So how do we prioritize the issues that we want to work on? And specifically, how do we listen to our community? And I think it might be interesting to talk about this, not just at both the individual level, but also maybe the organizational level, because I think we probably have folks attending this session who are kind of in different positions as activists.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that?
So it's a great question. And yes, I've been trying to tailor this to speak to both people who are maybe organizing on their own within their communities, as well as people who are professional organizers within organizations. When we think about organizing, again, I really want to emphasize, because I think it's so wonderful and I want to keep this momentum going, that the coalition building within our movements has been so powerful over the past, 5 years, 6 months, growing even stronger. And so it's so important for us to keep up those relationships and listen to each other, and not work in silos. So, whereas before we might say, this single issue is important to me, this single issue is important, and, we're kind of working in silos. Now we're doing a much better job of saying, okay, we have some momentum for voting rights at this moment. So let's make that the priority. Let's work together to lift that up, and let's make sure that HR 1, the For the People Act, that Senator Merkley is championing, let's make sure that we all bring our collective voices together and push that, making sure that now is the time that we're sending letters to the editor, that we're amplifying that on social media, that we're talking about it in our personal networks, and then once that, that's on the legislative calendar, we can take another step back and say, okay, what else is arising from the most marginalized communities, the ones whose voices traditionally haven't been centered? What's arising for them as the most timely messages? So it's really a matter of continuing these conversations and these relationships to figure out how to prioritize. And I know there's a reality that a lot of us face with regard to funders. There may be some funders here with us now. Funders often, they want to see something happen on the thing that they funded. And that's where a little bit of education for funders comes in as well, where, it's not just, you say jump, I say how high, but also a matter of figuring out and educating people about when it's most strategic to lift up an issue, and letting those funders and supporters know, like, look, I know you might want to see something happen on this right now, but I promise you, if we, take a moment to take a breath and join with others in coalition, 6 months from now, we could get an even bigger impact. So kind of that managing up and educating those around us about that kind of strategy, I think, is really important.
I really like that you brought that up, because I think so often in these sorts of discussions, like you said, this sort of siloing, there's also the siloing of like discussions around funding and the mechanics of funding and how it influences the work that gets done. It's like those happen in a completely different room with completely different people. So I think it's really great to bring that point in, because it is so critical as well. So I think we're sort of at the end of our time. I didn't see any other questions. Are there any last things that you wanted to say, Anita, before we wrap up here?
I just wanted to thank everybody again. I know it's a beautiful Saturday out. I am so grateful for everybody's time and the expertise that you all bring to this work and this journey. And I really believe in us and in our ability to strengthen our communities and to create the nation and the world that we want together. I really do.
We do too. And thank you so much, Anita, for speaking to everyone today. And thank you to Carol and Ari, our wonderful ASL interpreters, for the session. Everyone, if you could go rejoin, we'll all be rejoining the main session now for our closing. So you can go ahead and exit this room and log back into the main room, and we'll see you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.